into Denton's office, your favorite Commanders YouTube show. If this is your first time watching, be sure to subscribe on the Team 980. You can follow me on Twitter. You see it on the whiteboard. Yeah, I got a whiteboard. Only important people have whiteboards. It is Combine Week in the NFL. The NFL draft and the lead up to the NFL draft is one of my favorite times of the NFL calendar. So I'm really excited for this video. I'm really excited for this week. Now, this is not going to be like some super in-depth analysis of every single guy in the combine. This is more going to be rapid fire. And if you are a Commanders fan that is interested in the combine, maybe you don't follow this, super duper closely until post combine. I'm just going to give you a couple of names at positions of general need for the Commanders that you can pay attention to and watch along this week and this weekend just to kind of see how they perform. Think of it as like the NFL Combine for dummies from a Commanders perspective. So I want to start just by laying out the schedule here. You get some special teams guys on Wednesday. That will be something to pay attention to, but we're not going to sit here and break down kickers. We know the team needs a kicker. I trust that they are going to find an adequate kicker and hope and pray that they're going to find an adequate kicker. I don't know that it is going to come in the NFL draft, but you're going to get a lot of special teams guys on Wednesday. Thursday is when we start to really pay attention. You get defensive line, you get linebackers. Friday is DBs and tight ends. Saturday is quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers. And then Sunday is reserved for the big boys in the trenches on offense with the offensive line. And the offensive line is where we are going to start. So we'll start all the way out there. We will kind of work our way back. So the Commanders are picking at 29. If you're watching this video, you probably knew that already. Will Campbell at LSU is the consensus first tackle that is going to be off the board. And through this lead up, I've been really intrigued as to what is the gap between Will Campbell and everybody else. And as I have looked into more things and as I have spoken to more people, it seems like that despite the fact that most mock drafts have Campbell going super duper high and then a sizable gap between the next tackle, there are some good tackles in this particular draft and some good tackles that could be available at 29. The one that really jumps off the board is going to be Josh Simmons. He played at Ohio State. Now, he's coming off a knee injury, which could be something to focus on if you are the Commanders. But outside of that knee injury, if you take that away, which I know is a tough thing to do, but if you take that away, there are some people that think he might be the best tackle in this class. He comes from a championship level program with Ohio State, which in the NFL, if you are trying to build a championship level roster, it's never a bad thing to go take really good players from teams that won championships. Now, he wasn't with Ohio State towards the end of it because of the injury, but there is a lot of upside there. So if you don't really know what you have in Brandon Coleman, or maybe you don't love the prospect of Andrew Wiley moving forward, Josh Simmons is a guy that you can look at. He's a big body offensive tackle. His talent, as I mentioned, is crazy. And I just kind of asked around to some people that I happen to know around the Ohio State program. I was like, what is he as a person? And everything came back thumbs up. Good dude, loves football, likes to get after it. So that's a name that you might want to pay attention to. You're probably not going to see him work out. Obviously, I don't think he's going to be running a 40 coming off of a knee injury, but in terms of measurements, what does he look like, right? Right now, he measures 6'5", 310 pounds at 22 years old. What is that going to be at the combine? Is he working out? Is he putting weight on? I mean, the size, that's not going to change, but is he putting weight on? 310 is a good size, obviously, for a tackle, but if you can get maybe to 320, it'd be a pretty good spot. Next on that list is going to be Kelvin Banks, and this is the guy that I think could be the diamond in the rough. If you're the Commanders, most people have him going around that sort of 18 to 22 mark. But if you see a fire sale on other positions, he could be one of the guys that slips through the cracks. This is the guy that has been most compared to Will Campbell. So if you're Washington, he played at Texas. Texas had a really good season this year. He's 6'4", 320 pounds. He's a little bit younger than Josh Simmons at 20 years old. This is something that I would really keep an eye on. You'll get to see him a little bit more this week and this weekend on Sunday. I really like Kelvin Banks Jr. If Washington ends up leaving round one with him, I think that's a very, very big win for the Commanders. And then the final tackle just to keep an eye on here is going to be Josh Conerly of Oregon. Oregon's offensive line, they were a Joe Moore Award finalist, which is the award for best offensive line in college football. And that kind of circles back to the point I made about Josh Simmons. It's never a bad idea to get a player from a really good program that had a lot of success. And if you're a Joe Moore Award finalist and you're playing tackle, you're usually pretty good, right? Like if you're even in the contention for the Joe Moore Award, it's because your outside guys, right and left tackle, are really, really good. This is a guy that if you pay attention to Todd McShay, if you like Todd McShay, he really, really likes. He's 21 years old, 6'4", currently 315 pounds. Again, we'll see kind of what happens when he get measured at the combine. But Connerly is a guy that more likely than not is going to be available in the late 20s. With Banks, with Simmons, these guys could go as high as like 10. They could go to the Commanders at 29. It sure feels like Connerly is going to be a guy that is going to very much be in their grasps at 29 if they decide not to trade up to make a move for anybody. So those are the tackles. It's not everybody, but it's just a couple of names to pay attention to. My biggest need and biggest priority for the Commanders is the edge. Who are some of the guys that they could be going after in the edge game? The first one, you're not going to see Abdul Carter on this list. They are not going to draft Abdul Carter. James Pierce Jr. is a fascinating case, though, because if you look at everything talent wise, he checks every single box. He can get after the quarterback, he can stop the run. The problem with him is that as we get closer and closer to the draft, you hear rumors of character concerns. And it's not like there's something in particular, at least that I know of, that has happened off of the field. It's just, who is he? And I don't know him. I can't validate some of these character concerns, but it's just something that you starting to hear more and more as we get closer to the draft. So that's something that you have to monitor. So if you look at some mock drafts and you see James Pierce Jr. going 15, 20, I actually saw a mock draft with him going to the Commanders at 29. It's because of that. It's not a talent thing. The talent, it checks every single box. He's the second best edge in this class behind Abdul Carter, but there are some stuff off of the field that maybe is going to have some teams scratch their head a little bit. And because this particular class is so deep, if you have a guy with some character concerns, you're just going to go another direction. So great talent with James Pierce Jr. I'm excited to see what he does this weekend, but I would be a little skeptical about what is he like as a person. That's where you're going to have to fully rely on Adam Peters and Dan Quinn to get this guy in a room and then really kind of grill into him and talk to some of the coaches, some of the players that he played with and get a good idea of what this guy is. Here's a kind of an insider tip for you if you weren't aware. All these coaches are going to talk to their college coaches, and more often than not, the college coaches are pretty honest. They're going to give them a good, shall we say, they will flesh it out, if you will. So whoever they talk to on that Tennessee coaching staff is going to either validate or completely shut down these character concerns, but they're going to be honest in the process. That's how you keep relationships with guys in the NFL. It's better to be honest than to lie and then end up screwing somebody, especially somebody like Adam Peters and Dan Quinn that's been around the league for a long, long time. A guy that a lot of people have fallen in love with because of the Senior Bowl is Mike Green from Marshall. He was great at the Senior Bowl. The issue with him is that he played at Marshall. That's not to say he's a bad player because he played at Marshall, but you have a lot of these other guys on this list that are Power Four players that were consistently going up against the top tier talent in college football on a weekly basis, where that was not the case with Mike Green. But he's a guy that's been skyrocketing up boards because he was so good at the Senior Bowl. He was so competitive. He has a complete game. He can get after the passer. He can get after you in the run game. He can win one-on-one matchups. He has a good skill set of moves. Not going to be available more likely than not when the Commanders pick, but at least some guy to keep an eye on. Mykel Williams from Georgia is another one. A lot of raw talent. He's much better at run defense than he is pass defense, but he's a good pass rusher, right? So he can do both things, but he really, really stands out when it comes to the run game and playing the run. And obviously, if you watch the Commanders this season, playing the run is something that they need to get better at. And again, he came from Georgia. There is a long tenured history of defensive players from Georgia stepping into the NFL and being really, really good. If you want a good idea of what Mykel Williams was, go back and watch Georgia versus Texas. Not the one in the playoff game of the SEC championship. Go watch it at the middle of the season when Georgia was in Austin to take on Texas. This guy was a game wrecker. It was him, it was Walker, but they were absolutely shredding the Texas offensive line, and they completely got in the head of Quinn Ewers to the point where he had to take a little bit of a break, and we had to see Arch Manning for a little bit. Final guy here that I'm going to bring up, final two guys. They play on the same team. You got Nick Scorton from Texas A&M. This is like their run stopper, can get after the passer, but their run stopper. But my favorite edge and a guy that I think could be available for Washington at 29 is Shamar Stewart. This guy fits in DC from a mentality standpoint. He is an all hustle, all grind kind of guy. I hate to make this comparison because it feels like I'm punching down a little bit, but take all of the issues that most of us had with Chase Young in the motor, and he's the opposite. Even in a big blowout, he's still going hard. If you're trying to build a culture and trying to build a defensive line, this could be a guy that comes in. He fits right away. He could be a week one starter immediately. He can get after the passer. He can get after you in the run game, can set an edge, but he never stops going. The motor is just insane on this guy. And on top of that, just from a measurement standpoint, he has really long arms. You love an edge guy that has really long arms. It makes it very tough for an offensive tackle when you have a guy in Shamar Stewart whose arms, his reach might be upwards of 34 inches. So that's going to be really big for him. Again, this is one of my favorite edges in this class, given where Washington is currently sitting right now in the NFL draft. I know a lot of y'all care a lot about running backs. So we got to talk a little bit about running backs. There was news this week that Ashton Jeanty is going to meet with the Commanders. Pie in the sky, more likely than not. He is not going to be available at 29. In fact, what I learned from kind of asking around to people in the draft space, I don't know that TreVeyon Henderson is going to be around at 29, which is crazy when you consider that just a couple years ago, it was almost idiotic to draft a running back in the first round. Now we might get three running backs in the first round. And depending how the quarterback scene looks, you might get more running backs than quarterbacks in the first round of the draft. TreVeyon Henderson is a guy that is skyrocketing up all of these boards. And the comparison that I got is that some teams might see a little bit of Jahmyr Gibbs in TreVeyon Henderson. He averaged 4.43 yards after contact this year in college football, which is massive. He has great speed. He's a great blocker. He doesn't really need to come off of the field. And if you're Washington, you get Austin Ekeler back this year. You signed him to a 2-year deal, so you get him back this year. There is questions. What do you want to do with Brian Robinson? And more likely than not, you don't really need Brian Robinson here in 2025 if you can find a guy that fits what you're trying to do better. TreVeyon Henderson is that guy. So watch him. I'm very fearful if he runs some super silly 40 that guys and teams are just they're going to start trading up to get this guy, and he might not even be available at 29. Omarion Hampton from UNC is another guy that I really like. He's most guys running back two on their big board, the consensus running back two. The thing that Omarion Hampton has is, again, 4.35 yards after contact. I love it when guys can take some hits and keep it going. Now, he played in the ACC, not the Big Ten, which is not as great of a conference when it comes to some of the defenses that you saw, but he's been really good in the college realm for a really long time. But he might not be available at 29. Dylan Sampson from Tennessee is a great player. He's a little smaller. He might not even measure in at 200 pounds, which is a running back. Could be something, but that's something that you'll monitor. What is he going to measure in at? Because if he can get over 200 pounds, I think Dylan Sampson could be really good in the NFL. Cam Scatterbo is a guy that you want to pay attention to because of the college football playoff that he had. He became a little bit of a superstar. But the one guy that I do really want to key in on here, TreVeyon Henderson would be my first pick if I'm Washington as to running backs to get. Jeanty aside, I would want TreVeyon Henderson here. And I know that a lot of you want TreVeyon Henderson here. If that doesn't work, Caleb Johnson's a really good option. 6'1", 215 pounds. I know he played at Iowa, and most people, if you are not the biggest college football fan in the world, the only thing you know about Iowa is that their offense sucks. And to be fair, that is correct. But he was a large focal point in the only good things that they did on offense. The one slight downside with Caleb Johnson, if you watch him, he looks really similar to Brian Robinson. Like from the way that they run, the way that they attack the hole, like it's really similar to Brian Robinson. And I like Brian Robinson. You probably like Brian Robinson. I don't know that I would feel comfortable with like a Brian Robinson 2.0. It's not to say they're the exact same player, but you watch them and you're like, ugh, there's a lot of similarities with sort of the things that they are doing there. So that's going to be something just to pay attention to. Watch Caleb Johnson, see what he runs in the 40. He was not described to me as what you would consider a home run hitter, which is something that Washington very desperately needs. And then final running back is DJ Giddens, 6'1, 212 pounds. Played at Kansas State, really good player there for a long time. I think he's very similar to TreVeyon Henderson, where he might take a step into the NFL and be a significantly better NFL player than he was a college player. You know, TreVeyon Henderson was good at Ohio State, but he certainly wasn't great. I think TreVeyon Henderson and DJ Giddens could be guys that come to the NFL if they find themselves in the right position. And for the first time, and God knows when, stepping into Washington is going to be the right position for a lot of these guys. They could be absolute superstars at the running back position. And then final position, NFL Combine for Dummies here on Denton's office. It's the wide receivers. Tetero McMillan is likely not going to be available for Washington, although he's a great player. Travis Hunter is 1,000% not going to be available for Washington. Luther Burden III sure seems like he wants to play here, just based off the fact that it feels like he comments on all of Jane Daniels' Instagram posts. Maybe they're best friends. I don't really know, but he comments on his post a lot. He would love to be here. He would fit here. That's your slot guy. If you go get Luther Burden for the first couple years, that's going to be a guy that he's going to win all the matchups in the slot. He's not quite 6 foot. He's going to measure in probably 5'10, 5'11, but he is a burner and he can do everything in the book that you want as a wide receiver. He can block. He has a route tree. I thought he was the best wide receiver. If you just look like pound for pound, I thought he was the best wide receiver in college football this year and last year. So he did it 2 years in a row in a program in Missouri that has not exactly been known for pumping out great players. But in this era where they have been pretty good, he has been the real standout. And then Emeka Mbuka is another guy to pay attention to. Coming from Ohio State, getting to pair with his guy, Terry McLaurin, a little bit bigger, 6'1". I think you can put him on the outside and he can produce for you come week one almost immediately. And then the final wide receiver is Matthew Golden. He really started to play well towards the end of the season for Texas, which is great. I love it when the games get bigger, and so does the wide receiver. When he starts to play really well in games, I'm going to be curious to see what he runs. Very similar size to Terry. He's about 6 feet, but he was clutch, and you can't teach clutch, right? Like he has whatever that gene is, he has it. So watch out for him. Watch out for Luther Burden. Watch out for Emeka Mbuka. So these are just some guys, right? This is a very general NFL combine for dummies here on Denton's office. Pay attention to some of these guys. We're going to take maybe a report back, if you will, coming up next week. Again, I love the combine. You got combine questions for me? Drop them below in the comments section. I love these things. I think they're fantastic. I'm excited to see what it is this weekend and see really like guys take the next step into making their dream a reality, and hopefully see some guys take the next step to make their dream a reality here in Washington to then make our dream a reality of hoisting up the Lombardi. I appreciate you stopping by my office. Follow me on Twitter at the Denton Day. Now, respectfully, I need to go, so you need to go. Now get out of my office.